Ever feel stuck? Like you're running in circles, hitting that same wall over and over again, no matter what you do. Well, today's deep dive might just have the answer. You guys sent in this excerpt from Polarity Intelligence, The Missing Logic in Leadership. And I gotta say, this one's got me thinking.
Yeah, it's a real perspective shift. And even though the title focuses on leadership, don't be fooled, this stuff really applies to everyone.
Oh yeah, for sure. So
Yeah.
they kick off the book with this whole example about healthcare in the 90s. Everyone was like hyper-focused on this Newtonian worldview,
Right, breaking it all down
like the smallest parts.
into the tiniest pieces.
Which, I mean, for medicine, that makes sense, right? You got to find the problem, you got to treat the problem.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Yeah.
So that super focus, it led to some amazing medical breakthroughs, but it also created some blind spots.
Because health isn't just about, like, are you sick or are you not sick? It's all this other stuff too, right?
Exactly. It's the whole picture. Your mental health, your environment, your work, even your social life.
Yeah, all of that. And that's where this polarity thing comes in, right?
Yeah, the book basically argues that a lot of the challenges we face, they're not actually problems to be solved, but polarities to be, like, managed.
Ooh, okay, hold on. I feel a light bulb moment, but let's break that down for me. What is a polarity in this context?
Think of it like breathing.
Okay?
You can't just inhale forever, can you? You need both the inhale and the exhale. Two opposite actions, but both are essential for, well, living.
So two sides of the same coin kind of thing.
It's more like a dance, you know?
Yeah.
Think about work-life balance. You can't just work all the time, and you can't just relax all the time. Or what about stability versus change?
Ooh, yeah.
Too much stability, things get stagnant. Too much change, total chaos. The book argues that mastering this dance between the two, those polarities, is, like, essential.
And getting those two things confused, like thinking we can just solve for one, that's where we get stuck.
Often, yeah. This either thinking is what keeps us trapped, facing the same challenges over and over. This book, it's all about the both hand, not about picking one side over the other. It's about figuring out how both can work together.
They had this great example about like decision-making in a business, right?
Yeah. Directive versus participative decision-making. Directive's great for, like, when you need a decision in a BUE, it's clear, it's efficient, but it can leave people feeling like they weren't heard.
Yeah, totally.
Participative, everyone's involved, but it can be slow, it can be messy, so it's a polarity.
Okay, so how do we actually use this polarity thinking in the real world? Like, how do we find that sweet spot?
That's where it gets really cool. The book lays out these steps to, like, map out a polarity.
Wait, literally draw a map.
Well, you could. It's more about being able to really see both sides, what's good about each side, what's not so good, and then figuring out what you can do to use both sides effectively. You know, like, what are the warning signs that you're only focusing on one side, and how do you course correct?
So it's like having a game plan, not just knowing that these two opposite things exist.
Exactly. It's all about taking action. The book's got tons of real-world examples, strategies you can use. Honestly, I was thinking about my own life while reading it.
Okay, now I'm really interested. We're going to take a quick break, but when we get back, let's dive into those strategies. How can our listeners start using this polarity mapping to deal with their own challenges? Stick with us. You don't want to miss this. All right, so we're back, and I am ready to learn more about this whole polarity mapping thing. Is it really as simple as it sounds?
It can be. The book breaks it down in a way that's super practical. Like, imagine you're drawing a map, right? And it's got 2 points on it. Those are your poles. So let's stick with that decision-making example from before. One pole is directive. The other one is participative.
Okay, so far so good. Then what?
So you list out the benefits of each, right? Directive decisions, they're fast, they're clear, they're efficient. Participative decisions, they get everyone on board, you get all these different ideas, everyone feels heard.
Right, but then there's the downsides too, right? Like we were saying, too much directive leadership and people feel steamrolled, too much participation and it's like endless meetings and no one can make a decision.
Exactly, and that's where this map, it really comes in handy. Because you see those downsides written right there, and you can start brainstorming, like, what can you do to counteract those downsides? So under directive, maybe you add something like schedule regular check-ins for feedback so that people still feel heard.
Oh, I like that.
Right. And then under participative, you might write set clear deadlines and make sure everyone knows how decisions will be made.
So it's like you've got this cheat sheet for staying in that sweet spot. That's awesome. And it's not about ignoring one side completely. It's about using the best parts of both. I bet this could even help with those times you feel totally stuck Like there's just no good option, you know?
Absolutely. In fact, the book talks about developing a polarity mindset, and that's all about recognizing that these impossible choices, it's not about finding the right answer. It's about embracing the both hand.
So instead of just being frozen, like, I don't know what to do,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, how can I make sure I'm honoring both of these needs?
Yes, exactly. And that shift, that's huge EE.
Yeah.
Because then all of a sudden new possibilities open up, right? You're not just stuck between a rock and a hard place. The book actually uses this image of an infinity loop. It's not about finding the balance point in the middle and just staying there.
Right.
It's about constantly moving between the two poles.
Dynamic is the key word here, right?
Okay.
Because these things, they're always changing.
Yes, precisely. And that's what makes it so challenging, but honestly so rewarding too. Because the better you get at recognizing these polarities and working with them, the more adaptable you become, more resilient, more effective in everything you do.
Okay, but how does this actually work in real life?
It's about recognizing those patterns we talked about earlier. Remember that feeling of being stuck, hitting your head against the wall?
Oh, yeah.
That's your cue to stop and ask, am I actually dealing with a polarity here?
So not, I'm doing something wrong, but maybe there's another way to look at this.
Yes. That aha moment is huge. Imagine finally understanding why a certain approach at work just keeps backfiring, or why you and your partner keep having the same argument over and over. It's not about placing blame, it's about, okay, what's the underlying polarity here and how can we work with it?
And this book gives us the actual tools to do that, to move from just understanding the idea to like putting it into practice. The authors even say that this lack of polarity intelligence is contributing to some big problems in the world today.
Yeah, they talk about things like political polarization, where people are so stuck on their side that they can't even see the other perspective. They're saying, what if we started seeing these different viewpoints as polarities, as two sides of the same coin? We could actually have productive conversations and find solutions that work for everybody.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. Let's bring it back down to earth for a second. You mentioned the book has exercises, tools to actually develop this polarity intelligence. What are some examples? What can our listeners do, like today, to start putting this into practice?
Well, one of the most powerful tools is that polarity mapping, right? And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just start paying attention to those challenges that keep popping up in your life. Pick one and try mapping it out.
So grab a notebook, write down the two poles, what's good about each, what's not so good, what's next.
The fun part, brainstorm actions. What can you do to get the good stuff from both sides and avoid the bad stuff? Remember how we talked about healthy relationships? This is where they're so important, because a lot of times these polarities, they show up in how we interact with other people.
So it's not enough to just like figure this out in our own heads. We've got to learn to navigate these polarities with other people.
Exactly. And the book, it gives some really good advice on that. Being intentional about how we're interacting, making sure there's space for open and honest communication, remembering that everyone has their own perspective.
So basically being good at relationships, that's part of this whole polarity intelligence thing.
I think that's a really great way to put it, because without those strong, healthy relationships, even if you're a pro at polarity mapping, it's not going to get you very far. We've got to be able to actually connect with people, build trust, have real conversations if we want to really use this.
Speaking of conversations, I know the book talks a lot about meaningful dialogue. What exactly does that mean? And why is it so important when it comes to all of this?
Well, it's about recognizing that communication, it's not just about sharing information, right?
Yeah.
It's about creating a space where you can actually share different perspectives, where you can move past right and wrong and get to a place of real understanding.
And I imagine that's even more important when you're dealing with these polarities, which can be kind of, touchy.
Absolutely. If you're not careful, those conversations can turn into arguments so quickly. The book talks about approaching these conversations with curiosity, with empathy, really listening to understand the other person, even if you don't agree with them.
So it's like a more compassionate way of communicating, especially about these things that can be really divisive.
Yeah.
Do they have any specific tips for actually having these meaningful dialogues?
They do. They talk about like setting an intention before you even start talking, using I statements to share your own experience without blaming the other person, asking clarifying questions to make sure you really understand where they're coming from. They also talk about creating a space where people feel safe being honest and vulnerable.
So it's like this meaningful dialogue stuff is just as important as understanding how to work with the polarities themselves.
Yeah, I think you're right, because even if you're amazing at polarity mapping and you've got the best intentions, if you can't communicate with people, it's not going to work.
So we've got the polarity mindset, we've got the healthy relationships, and now we've got meaningful dialogue. It's like the three legs of a stool. You need all of them.
Exactly. And that's what the book does so well. It brings all of those things together. It shows how they all work together to help you become a better leader, build stronger relationships, and honestly, just live a happier, more fulfilling life.
This has been amazing, but we're running short on time. Before we wrap up, is there one piece of advice, like the one thing you really want our listeners to remember about this whole polarity intelligence thing?
Don't be afraid of the paradox. The world is full of these seemingly opposite forces, and that's okay. It's in that tension, in that dance between the poles, that we find our greatest potential for growth, for creativity, for really feeling fulfilled.
I love that. Embrace the paradox. So simple, but so profound. And I think it really gets at the heart of this whole polarity intelligence thing. We're going to take one more quick break, but when we get back, let's dive even deeper into this idea of embracing the paradox and explore how it can help us navigate this crazy thing called life. You know, it's funny, we always talk about wanting balance in our lives, but this whole polarity intelligence thing, it's kind of next level, right? It's not just finding that perfect middle ground. It's more like learning to dance with these opposite forces.
It's way more dynamic and honestly, way more realistic. Because let's be real, life isn't about finding the perfect balance. It's about always adapting, always adjusting, finding that sweet spot, even though everything's always kind of pushing and pulling you in different directions.
And like you were saying before, that's where embracing the paradox comes in. But what does that actually look like? How do we get better at not just tolerating, but actually embracing those parts of our lives that seem totally contradictory?
Well, first, you got to shift your mindset. Instead of seeing these opposite forces as problems, you got to start seeing them as opportunities. Opportunities for growth, for creativity. Think about it. Some of the most innovative ideas, the most amazing art, even the best relationships, they come from that place of tension, that push and pull between two seemingly opposite things.
So it's about being able to see the value in both sides, even especially when it feels like they clash.
Exactly. And I know it's easier said than done, right? Especially these days, it's like the world wants us to pick a side and just stay there. But the truth is, life is way more complicated than that. And when we try to shove everything into these neat little boxes, we miss out on all the good stuff, all the richness, all the messy, complicated beauty of it all.
Yeah, it's like that whole truth is somewhere in the middle kind of thing. But maybe it's not even about finding the middle, Maybe it's about being able to hold both of those extremes in your head at the same time and somehow make them work together.
That's a great way to put it. It's about expanding our capacity for complexity, for being able to handle more than one perspective, even when those perspectives seem like total opposites. And the better we get at that, the better we'll be at navigating those polarities in our own lives.
You mentioned before that the authors say this lack of polarity intelligence is causing some big problems in the world today. And I gotta say, as you're talking, it's hard not to think about everything going on in the world right now. All the division, all the arguing, everyone's so stuck in their own little corner, so sure that they're right, that there's no room for actual conversation or compromise.
And that's exactly the kind of thinking that polarity intelligence challenges us to question. It's like, step back from those entrenched positions for a second and ask yourself, what if there's more to this? What if it's not about choosing one side, but figuring out how to honor both?
It's about going from me versus you to we.
Yes, exactly. And that doesn't mean you have to agree with everyone or that you shouldn't stand up for what you believe in, but it does mean maybe, just maybe, we can do it with a little more curiosity, a little more empathy, a little more willingness to understand where the other person is coming from, even if we don't agree with them.
It's about remembering that we're all in this together, even when we disagree.
Yeah.
That if we actually want to find solutions, we have to be able to see beyond our own limited perspectives.
It's about seeing each other as human, even when it's hard. And it's about having those difficult conversations, but doing it wanting to work together, not fight.
That's a tough one, for sure. But there's something really hopeful about this whole polarity intelligence thing. because it means maybe there is a way to get past all the division and actually start building a future that works for everyone.
And that's really what this book, this whole conversation is all about. It's not just about understanding these polarities. It's about actually using that understanding to create a better world for ourselves and for everyone who comes after us.
It's about realizing that the things that divide us, those things that seem like opposites, they can also bring us together. They can push us towards greater understanding, creativity, deeper connection.
It's about embracing the paradox and realizing that paradox, that's where we find our greatest potential as individuals, as communities, as a global society.
This has been an incredible deep dive. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all of this with us.
My pleasure.
And to all of you listening, we hope this has given you some new ways to think about the challenges in your own life. Remember, Polarity Intelligence, it's a journey, not a destination. So be patient with yourself. Keep practicing, and whatever you do, don't be afraid to embrace the paradox. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.